Straight Shift with the Car Chick, the podcast that's all about cars, buying, selling, fixing, and driving, and sometimes pretty fast if you're the car chick. Now, here she is.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Straight Shift. One of the most common things that I hear from my clients when I'm helping them buy cars is, should I buy a new car or should I buy a used car? Which is better? And I'm sure you've probably heard the old adage, oh, a car loses, half of its value the minute you drive it off the lot. So today I want to talk about which is better, buying new, buying used. And like most things in life, and especially in the automotive industry, it's just not that black and white. So I want to talk about kind of what's the truth about new versus used, and how much money can you really save, and which is better under which circumstances. It is true that cars do have the most depreciation initially when you drive it off the lot. Typically, it's about 20% on average in the first 12 months that you own a car. So you take the biggest hit in that first year. And why is that true? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, once you buy a car, and once a new car has been purchased, it gets titled and registered with the DMV, and that officially makes it a pre-owned car. So even if you just immediately turn around and take it back to the dealership, it's only got, 500, 1,000 miles on it, you're going to take a pretty big hit because now it's a used car. And the next buyer that comes along, they have to do this cost analysis of, well, should I buy new? Should I buy used? And there has to be enough of a savings on a used car to make it worth buying a car used. Otherwise, they'll just buy new. So it's the same argument, and that's why you have that initial depreciation. The other reason is when you buy any car, not only are you paying the price of the car, but you're also paying the tax, your tag and title fees, your dealer doc fees, so all that out the door numbers. And those are the taxes and fees, that's money that's just kind of a sunk cost. You never get that money back. So you've immediately lost those costs the second that you have driven it off the road. And that's why there is that initial depreciation. But it's not really true that the car loses half its value the second you drive it off the lot. That initial depreciation depends on a lot of different factors. There's not a set number. It's about residual value, and that's going to depend on the year and the mileage. So just how old and how used is this car? So for example, a car that's only 1 year old and maybe has 5,000 miles or less is obviously going to still be worth more than a 3-year-old car with 35 to 40,000 miles on it. So that initial depreciation, will depend on the time frame that you're looking at. And one thing that we have to consider today is that the used car market has changed a lot in the last decade. You'll probably remember the lovely financial fiasco of kind of 2008, 2009, where we had that mess in the financial markets. We started into a recession. Gas prices shot through the roof, and that really changed the used car landscape. Used car values shot through the roof because people were trying to, get out of that new car, lower their payment, or get into something more fuel efficient. And it really shook up the industry. And then that stupid Cash for Clunkers program came along that was a total mess, and that took so much supply out of the used car market, and therefore lower supply drove up prices. It's all economics. It's just supply and demand. So a lot of the hard and fast rules, so to speak, of 10, 20 years ago aren't necessarily that clear cut today. And I don't believe that the world is black and white anyway, so there are very few things that I will say are absolutes. And especially when it comes to, what is the right car for you, because your particular circumstances are going to be different than another person's, and nobody's situation in life and car buying goals are exactly the same. So Another thing that will affect kind of what that initial depreciation is the type of car that it is. Certain makes and models hold their value better than others. Vehicles that are really expensive to begin with, over 50 to 60,000, especially in that 60 to $100,000 price range. Now, which, yeah, I mean, that's just crazy. That's like the price of a house. But those vehicles will usually take a bigger initial hit. So those can be vehicles that it may make sense to buy slightly used because you can get a bigger savings versus, if you're buying a car that's only $20,000 to begin with, just from a percentage standpoint, the cost savings is going to be lower. Different specific makes and models hold their value better than others. Typically, your Japanese brands, especially your Toyotas and your Hondas, they traditionally hold their value very well because they have a reputation for reliability. So they're also fuel efficient typically. So those cars tend to hold their value a little bit better. So they're not necessarily going to have as much of an initial depreciation as your American cars. And you can kind of see which cars hold their value better by looking at which vehicles have better leases, because lease terms are primarily determined by what that residual value of the car is going to be at the end of the lease. And that's why your Asian cars tend to have better lease deals than your American cars, because they're going to hold their value better. Now, I'm looking at right now, I'm doing some shopping for a few different clients. It's the end of the month, so my life is crazy. But I'm looking, for example, for one client for a big Ford Expedition Max, the equivalent as a Suburban in the Ford world. And I found one that's a year old, and we're going to be able to save almost $20,000 off the initial sticker price. Now, granted, that initial sticker price was over 80 grand, so that's just crazy to begin with. So just percentage wise, you can see why the numbers work out. But, in this case, it's actually a brand new 2018 that just happens to be left over that never sold for no particular reason that I can tell. So, that's a great case of getting the best of both. We're buying new and we're getting a ridiculous amount off. But I've looked at, I've done this analysis for a lot of clients, and sometimes you can get a significant savings. Earlier in the spring, I bought an Audi A4 for one of my clients that had been really souped up, had all the bells and whistles on it, really looked like the S4, the sport version. Beautiful car, had less than 5,000 miles on it. Pretty much the previous owner had bought it, tricked it out, took good care of it, and then he had it in for his first oil change and saw this other car on the showroom floor, and he fell in love with it, and he just traded because apparently losing that initial depreciation wasn't a big deal to him. He could afford it. So as a result, I was able to buy a 1-year-old car, really a 6-month-old car for my client. I think we saved about $6,000 versus had we bought it new. So in that case, plus it was certified pre-owned. So we really got the same amount of warranty. We weren't giving that up. So in that case, it made total sense. In the past, I have also looked at a slightly used Toyota Corolla for a client or a slightly used Honda Accord. And because that month there were some pretty good deals on the new cars, but the used ones were still kind of set at their prices from when they were taken in on trade. And it was maybe a $2,000 difference, versus, a brand new car with a full warranty and no miles versus one that was a couple of years old and had 30,000 miles on it and the warranty was about to expire. For an extra $2,000, it was totally worth going ahead and buying the new one. So that kind of gets into also, really, what kind of car are you looking for? Right now, the new versus used question is further complicated by the fact that we have a boatload of really desirable new technology that's just being rolled into the cars these days. So, for example, right now, I'm also shopping for a Mazda CX-5 for one client and a Hyundai Kona for the other. Both of them were kind of looking at, I should probably buy a used car. But the driver safety technology, the forward collision mitigation braking and whatnot, those were really important factors for them. And so because those features were just recently rolled out on the Mazda CX-5. You could get them in 2018 on the Grand Touring top of the line model. This year for 2019, you can get it on the Touring. Looking at that, we kind of had to make some decisions. So we are still looking at trying to find one that's a year old, because it does push our pricing into where she's comfortable budget-wise. But, it might, be a case where buying new, if she has a little more budget, may end up making sense if I can't find a good, slightly used one. Typically previously, if you're looking at cars that are 1 year old, you may get lucky, like I did on that Audi A4, and find one that the previous owner just, had bright, shiny object syndrome and saw another one that they wanted more and traded that one back in. Or sometimes people will realize, something will change in their life, or they will really have bought it on a whim and not really realize what the cost of ownership was and realize they made a mistake and trade it back in. But, typically your 1 year old cars, you have to watch out, because most of those are rental cars, especially if they have higher miles on them. So, that's not the highest quality car that you can buy. And, that's what I'm seeing mostly in these 1 year old Mazda CX-5s. They were all rentals, and I'm just not comfortable with the quality of any of them that I've found so far. So, we may end up switching back to a new one for that client. For the client I'm shopping for a Hyundai Kona for, that car just came out. They've only been out about a year, so there aren't that many used ones on the market, period. So for them, plus there's some pretty good incentives this month, so I'm able to get them a stupid good deal on a brand new one, and it made more sense, even though they're having to increase their budget just a teeny bit from where they really wanted to be, but it's worth it to them to have the driver aids, because they're an older couple and they, need to have that extra safety technology to feel comfortable on the road. So those are some factors that you really need to consider in terms of, is it better to buy new or used? If you're looking just at the numbers from a money standpoint, numbers can be black and white. So yeah, you can save a lot of money buying used. In fact, the average person owns 13 cars over the course of their life, and the average cost these days is about $30,000, which is just scary. That's just a lot of money for a car. But if you were to buy, instead of a new car, 13 of these over your lifetime, if you were to buy a slightly used one, you could save as much as $130,000 over your lifetime. And when you look at it in the aggregate like that, it's like, oh, okay, that's a lot of money. And that's just looking at the price that you would probably pay for the car itself. Buying used also saves you money in a couple of other places. The initial quote sales tax, it's technically called the vehicle tax. It's not a true sales tax, but for all practical purposes, we'll call it a sales tax. That's calculated obviously on the price of the car. So you'll pay lower taxes. If you are in a state that has personal property taxes, and don't get me started on how much I hate personal property taxes, but I've pretty much always lived in a state that has it, that is also assessed on the value of the car. So you'll pay less to the government in the personal property taxes, because, it's totally fair to tax us on stuff that we already own. But anyway, I'll get off that soapbox. And also your insurance rates. Insurance rates are going to be lower on a car that's slightly older versus one that's brand new. So you kind of got to look at the bigger picture of the money that you're spending. I'm going to take a really quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about, some of the intangibles on when it makes more sense to buy new versus when it makes sense to buy used. So don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. Do you hate car shopping? Do you worry about being taken advantage of, or about finding the right car at a fair price? Buying a car can be a frustrating and time-consuming experience. But what if you could get a great deal without having to do a ton of research, without having to haggle, and without the fear of buying a lemon? You can. As your personal car shopper, the Car Chick will help you pick the perfect car based on your unique lifestyle, budget, and personality. She'll handle all of the legwork and negotiating for you. All you have to do is sign the papers and take the keys. It's that easy. To learn how the Car Chick can save you time, money, and hassle on your next car purchase, give us a call at 888-575-2138. That's 888-575-2138. Or visit us on the web at thecarchick.com.
Automatic? Automatic? We don't need no stinking automatic.
Straight Shift with the Car Chick.
And we're back with the Straight Shift. I'm talking today about, is it better to buy a new car or a used car? Because of course, it's just never a black and white, always better to buy used than new kind of decision. And there are times when buying new may make more sense to you. And I talked before the break about some of the things that affect the actual dollar figures involved. And if you're the type of person that really just looks at the numbers and running those numbers, when does it make sense to go ahead and spend a little extra and get that new car versus, saving the money on a used car? And how much can you really save depending on how used you're buying? Are you buying 1 year old? Are you buying 3 years old? Are you buying 5 years old? Or what type of car are you buying? Because some just hold their value better than others. But there are some other kind of intangible considerations for most people that muddy the water a little bit and make it much more of a gray area. And one of the biggest ones is what I call the pain in the ass factor. Quite simply, buying a new car is just a lot easier than buying a used car. And for some people, that is a really big deal because they don't have a lot of time. I mean, even for me, and I do this for a living and buy a bazillion cars every year, new ones are easier than used ones. Typically on a new car, they're all essentially the same as long as you make sure they have, the same all the features that you want and finding the colors that you want. But you have multiple franchise dealers within a reasonable radius of where you live, and they all typically have inventory. So unless it's a vehicle that's really, really rare and hard to find or hasn't come out yet, maybe there's a wait list, that's a different ball game. But for the most part, if you're looking for your average car, it's going to be out there somewhere, and it doesn't take nearly as much time and effort to shop around and find one. And even if there's not the colors and the bells and whistles that you want in your area, dealers always do what's called a dealer trade. They'll locate it. They have access to the internal inventory systems for the manufacturer, and they can see that there's one, in the next state or a couple states away, and they'll just trade inventory with that dealer and bring the car to you. Depending on how far away, it may or may not affect the price that you pay. But it's just a lot easier to find the exact vehicle that you're looking for. And when you're shopping, you can compare truly apples to apples, compare the pricing and really see what's going to be the best deal for you. When you're shopping for a used car, suddenly you're not looking at apples to apples anymore, because there's no such thing as two used cars that are identical. Each used car has a different history. It's been maintained differently. It's been cared for differently. It's lived in different areas. It's driven on different streets. Maybe it has had kids in it, maybe not. Maybe dogs, maybe not. God forbid, maybe smokers in the car, which will kill the value. There's so many different factors that affect the quality of a used car. And I'm not going to go into those details. If you want to know more about that, just tune into a podcast episode. I think it was episode 8, where I talked about, what is your trade really worth? And that gives a really good detailed explanation of all the different factors that go into the value or the price of any used car on the market, whether it's one you're trading in or one you're looking to buy. But adding in those factors, now you've got to shop for quality for the money, bang for your buck. So now you're looking at the history of the car. You're looking, is this a good dealership? Has it been reconditioned properly? Even for me, in the streamlined process and the nitpicky process that I have for used cars, it just frankly takes longer. So, if you don't have a lot of time, like for example, I've got a client right now who, she called me last week and is like, yikes, my Suburban is starting to have problems and we're going to the beach next week and I'm not comfortable driving it. We need something right away. And so, looking for a used car for them was going to be a little bit trickier because we just didn't have a lot of time and there wasn't a lot of inventory out there. So, if you don't have a lot of time and if you're just not comfortable with, looking at a used car and knowing what to look for, then buying new may simply be the easier thing to do. And again, that's what I call the pain in the ass factor. New cars are less of a pain to buy than used cars. Yes, you'll pay more, But you'll also get the new car warranty. You are more likely to be able to find the exact options and color combinations that you want, because with any used car, you're really at the mercy of what happens to be on the market, and it may take you longer to find it, especially if you're very set on a very specific color combination, or you only want one with a manual transmission, which are hard to find, or you want some with some very specific options that were not as common. So you're kind of at the mercy of what's out there, versus with the new ones, yes, you're at the mercy of what's out there, but you're more likely to be able to find one somewhere that has what you want. Worst case, most cars you can order one or request an allocation and get exactly what you want. So it just depends on how picky you are and how much time you have and how much effort you want to put into it. I talked to you about the warranty. That needs to be something that you kind of think about when you're doing that new versus used analysis, because depending on the type of car and how important that warranty is to you, getting one, you may save some money buying one that's a couple years old and has some miles on it, but how much warranty do you have left? And what is the cost to replace that warranty or to extend that warranty so you still get a good number of years of miles coverage? What's the price tag on that? Because warranties these days are ridiculously expensive. So, that may add, another $3,000 to the price tag just to give you the same type of coverage that you would have gotten if you just bought the car new. So that's another intangible, although it directly relates to the numbers and the bottom line, but it's something to consider, because, if you can get one that's certified pre-owned that has, a longer warranty and the numbers still work out, that's great. But otherwise you may be, sacrificing warranty and coverage and therefore some peace of mind, or trading repair costs for initial costs. So that's something to consider as well. For vehicles that have a ridiculous amount of depreciation, and I'll list some of the ones that, I have seen have the highest, and I've also looked at some industry data. Some nice people have been kind enough to compile the data, looking at over 4 million used cars and calculating what the depreciation was on them so that I don't have to do that math. But, if you're looking at one of these big vehicles, a lot of them are your highline cars. Your BMWs or Mercedes. The fancier the car, the more the depreciation it's going to have. And the main reason for that is really the demographic that can afford those cars. Either you can afford an S-Class Mercedes or 7 Series BMW, with a, $80,000 to $100,000 price tag. Either you can afford one of those or you can't. And so kind of the next tier of people that could, I can afford a used one, that price is a lot lower. So, your S-Class Mercedes, your 7 Series BMW, kind of those big luxury European cars, they have some of the highest depreciation. Looking over 5 years, either one of those cars is going to lose 70% of its value typically in just 5 years. It'll lose, at least 50% in the first 3 years. So that's why if you're looking for a luxury vehicle, especially the European luxury vehicles, your Mercedes, your BMWs, your Audis, if you look at the certified pre-owned ones, what I call slightly used, or the vehicles that are coming off lease. Off-lease vehicles are usually the best bang for your buck in terms of letting someone else pay that initial depreciation, because the way leasing is calculated, leasing looks at that residual and kind of around the 3-year mark, 36 to 39 months, with people driving 12,000 miles to 15,000 miles a year. That is generally what leasing calls the sweet spot and is your optimal depreciation. So if you're looking for one of these vehicles, finding one that has come off lease, theoretically, if they've leased the car, they have also taken care of it reasonably well. The manufacturers can certify these and put that certification, the certified pre-owned warranty on them. And you can usually save a good amount of money, especially if it was one of these, 5 or 7 Series BMWs or an E-Class or S-Class Mercedes, any of the swankier luxury cars, you can get a pretty good deal on it. Another thing that I forgot to mention previously that affects the depreciation is whether or not that vehicle has been redesigned recently. So, when a vehicle is redesigned, and especially right now, because the redesigns that are happening right now are probably the most significant redesigns that we have seen in the industry, over the last several decades. And it's because they're adding all that crazy new technology. So, if a car has been significantly redesigned and that redesign either has just the look of it and the styling of it is just looks so much better than the old one, or they've added a lot of new technology, that means that the ones that's the previous body style is going to take a bigger hit because they're just not as valuable. So, for example, right now, the Toyota RAV4, the Subaru Forester, those have been redesigned. The Audi A6 has been redesigned. The A4 was recently redesigned. And there were some pretty significant changes. And so when we're looking at the slightly used cars, that's the previous body style. And their value is a little bit lower because people want the newer ones with all the new stuff or the new look or whatever. So, if the used car that you're looking at gets you into the previous body style, the previous generation of that vehicle, usually you can get a little bit more cost savings on that. The depreciation will be a little bit higher simply from a desirability standpoint. But it also means that you may have to sacrifice some of the bells and whistles. And as I've said, right now, the biggest driving factor are those driver safety aids, the electronic babysitters that I call them. But, if you're looking at, should I buy new or used? Well, you might be able to buy a 3-year-old car, and those safety features were available 3 years ago, but only on the top of the line, limited trim with the technology or driver assistance package, which drives the price up. But now if I get a new one, it was available on the base model. And quite frankly, if you don't need all those bells and whistles like the leather and the heated seats and all the other fancy stuff that's on the top model, you're basically paying the same price for a brand new one to get those driver safety features. I hope that makes sense. It's a little more complicated now because of the dramatic change that we have seen really in the last 12 to 24 months in a lot of the technology that's available in the vehicles. Wanted to give you a couple more, vehicles that I was kind of surprised when I saw the data have really high initial, 3 to 5 year depreciation. And the data is the 5-year mark, but a lot of your electric or plug-in hybrid vehicles, you would think that, those fuel-efficient cars would have held their value really well, especially as gas prices, continue to be high and we're kind of moving as a society towards really looking at those alternative fuels and having the green cars, the electric cars. Tesla has certainly made electric cars at least socially appealing, if not financially appealing. But I was really surprised to see, some of the cars that were highest on this initial depreciation list. The Ford Fusion Energy Hybrid, which is a plug-in hybrid. It's basically the Ford Fusion, but it's the one that you plug in your garage. And I've got a couple clients that I bought those for, and they're really nice cars. But I was shocked that, after 5 years, they've lost nearly 70% of their value. The Chevy Volt is the same way. And I think the Volt was really overpriced to begin with. It has over 70% depreciation in 5 years. And the same thing with the little Nissan Leaf. They haven't been as popular, and they were way overpriced to begin with. So I think that's probably why we're seeing some of those trailblazers in the electric car field are taking such a big hit on the depreciation, because they really were on the bleeding edge of technology when they first came out. And over 5 years, they realized, okay, they were overpriced. Not that many people bought them because there wasn't the infrastructure. I think going forward, we'll see those vehicles start to hold their value better as they become more mainstream and there's more infrastructure to support them. But that kind of surprised me until I really thought about it. And it'll be interesting to see how they go over, the next 5 years and what their depreciation is. But, pretty much anything made in the USA is going to depreciate more than anything made in Japan or even Korea. And, European luxury cars, especially the super big expensive ones, they are going to depreciate faster too. The Cadillac Escalade also has one of the highest depreciation rates. That has always been true. I think they're overpriced to begin with. So that's a vehicle that I typically tell my clients that like to buy those, yeah, we're definitely buying used there, and we'll take advantage of that initial depreciation. But sometimes it's just better to buy new. I hope all this has made sense. I know I threw a lot of stuff at you guys. If you're in the market for a car and you're having this debate, trying to figure out, does it make more sense to buy new or buy used? That is part of what I do. You're welcome to reach out to me. Check out my website at thecarchick.com. And otherwise, drive safely, folks, and I'll see you next time.
The Straight Shift podcast is copyright LeeAnn Shattuck, The Car Chick, 2017. All views expressed by guest and or co-hosts are those of the guest and or co-hosts, and not necessarily those of LeeAnn Shattuck or The Car Chick.